All right, welcome everybody to America This Week. Is everybody here? Can you all hear us?
Can you hear me? That's what's more important, right, Matt?
That absolutely is what's more important. I think between the two of us, you're gonna have more to add today. But we're gonna have to really stretch our media professional brains today, because this is maybe the single most uninteresting Super Tuesday. I mean, they won't even call it Super Tuesday after this again, will they? I mean,
well, what do you mean? I mean, it's a term of art. It means a lot of places at once. But you think after this boring Super Tuesday, it'll just be another Tuesday in primary season?
Yeah, I mean, if this trend of all the important things that happen in election season happening in courtrooms and continues, I mean, there was virtually no intramural competition allowed on either side. So, well, on one side it was obliterated, and the other side it just wasn't allowed. So, if that trend continues, I mean, there were multiple attempts to try to make competing days. Remember, there was Mini Tuesday. Remember that was a thing briefly.
How many years ago was that?
God, I think that was 2004. Anyone in the audience remember this? But there were attempts that actually, and there were several Super Tuesdays for a while. There was a period where I think there were at least 3.
Mm-hmm.
But then it became this thing where they conglomerated all these, over 15 states in both slates, and this was like the Super Bowl of presidential election campaign stories. And I mean, could there be a less suspenseful or interesting news story than Super Tuesday right now? I mean, I'm at a loss a little bit.
Well, you're right. As our elections have become, judicial and other kinds of events, they lose kind of pro sports excitement.
Right.
But it's going to be, it looks like, a decisive Super Tuesday for Donald Trump.
That's true. And Biden.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Biden. I'm unclear. I don't know, in all the times we've covered the primaries this year, we've ever seen much excitement on the Biden side. We tried to wish Dean Phillips into the race at one point, but we failed.
Well, but he did. I mean, Kennedy was originally a Democratic candidate in this race.
Right.
And they just zapped that out of there, and then they just by fiat eliminated Iowa and New Hampshire basically, and then they canceled the Florida primary, and so what are we left with? I mean,
media did do their best to make this a horse race on the Republican side. We've had, weeks and weeks now of Nikki Haley, maybe overperformed slightly, and Donald Trump underperformed slightly, and so on.
And we had this, Walter. We had this.
That's right. The decisive DC GOP primary,
which was decisively beaten, in news coverage and ratings by, for instance, the Knicks Cavs game.
Diners, drive-ins, and dives. Yeah, this is the tallest short man competition, isn't it? But it was definitive in its portrayal of Nikki as what Donald Trump suggests she is. Swamp creature.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, he did exactly what you would do in that situation if you're Donald Trump. He said the swamp has its queen, right? He spun it as a positive
movie or something,
Yeah,
Swamp Queen, Revenge of the Swamp Queen.
And I just got back from Northern Virginia, which is supposedly the only other place today that's going to be competitive Haley wise, and probably out of the 24 people I interviewed, probably over half of them said they thought they wouldn't be surprised if Haley actually won, say, Fairfax or Loudoun counties in Virginia, but the state, no way,
She might win Burlington, Vermont, or something like that.
Right? Yeah, exactly. A couple of these places, but the DC thing was funny because I hadn't paid attention to it, and here let's show the numbers just so that people can get whoops, I'm sorry, get a glimpse of exactly how monstrous those numbers were. Okay, so it was 1,279 votes to 676, which I guess is important, but I looked it up. The GOP primary for the District of Columbia is probably the single most useless election that we have in the United States. It has never in history delivered a single electoral vote. The District of Columbia has never delivered a single electoral vote to a Republican. The highest result by percentage that a Republican has ever gotten in the general election was Nixon with 21% in 1972. And the best electoral college result they ever got was an abstention by a Democratic elector in 2000. So this primary, like how which Republican beats which in DC has zero bearing on what happens in the election. But it's better than losing when you run unopposed, which is what happened the last time she was on a primary. So I guess it's an improvement.
Can Republican Congress people vote in the DC primary? I guess they're residents of their states.
Yeah, they would have to be, because they'd want to vote for themselves, among other things, right?
So who are these people? Who are these DC Republicans, and particularly, who are the MAGA Republicans of DC? What do we imagine they do, and why are they stranded there? That there are 600 of them is almost astonishing, really. I'm
right. I'm sorry. There are people saying that they're not getting any sound. Do we have sound? Yes, no? Anybody? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yes. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, I don't know who the MAGA Republicans are in Washington, D.C., but there obviously aren't that many of them, but I don't think that that's going to have a huge bearing on the race. Well, let's check in and see what some of the themes are. Let's go. Do you want to go to MSNBC?
Yes. Let's not overdo it, though, because I don't want to outdo our fair use budget, because they're so
Trump, Biden,
entertaining.
I think tonight's primaries, people will begin to come to that realization. And when they do, they're going to have a choice of a Joe Biden who wakes up every morning thinking about the American people, and a Donald Trump who wakes up every morning thinking about himself. This will be a stark choice. Democracy will be on the ballot. Women's reproductive freedom will be on the ballot. And I believe,
should we have a democracy is on the ballot counter
positively to Joe Biden's accomplishments, which have been
like a little tally, right?
When you look at this Congress and how they have a hard time doing anything, Joe Biden did more his first 2 years than most presidents could hope to do in 2 terms. I was in a rural county announcing water infrastructure investments. People coming up to me with tears running down their cheeks because they didn't have to boil water anymore. Talking to people who are actually getting their homes connected to high-speed internet.
All right, Walter. Look, I'm going to put C-SPAN on in the background, but leave it quiet there for a minute. So it looks like they called Virginia for Trump. But
the one potentially contested state has already been called.
Yeah, that's been called. But it looks like it's not a huge number. Doesn't look like. It's a plus 29 for Trump in Virginia.
You mean 29% more than Haley?
Yes.
That's what he won in South Carolina with. That's pretty big.
Yep, but she's okay. So it looks like they're projecting, and it's a very tight race in Loudoun County, which I just came back from, which is interesting. Hang on a second.
Let's remind the audience where Loudoun County is.
Okay, so here's Virginia, and Loudoun County is the richest county in America. And let me see here. This is Loudoun right here. So there's Loudoun County, there's Fairfax County, which is right next to it. There's Frederick County. This is sort of your DC corridor, Prince William County. Loudoun is by income the richest. It's always among the top 5 or 10, highest ranking in terms of percentage of college graduates. So this should be your absolute sweet spot for Democratic voters, which is why it was so surprising in 2021 when the split was only about 10 points for McAuliffe. That's part of the reason why Glenn Youngkin ended up winning. But the rumor was that Haley might pull one of these two counties, Fairfax or Loudoun, and you can see that it is actually competitive. It's 52-46 in Loudoun, and this is where the big school kerfuffle was. That was massively misreported, but we don't have to get into that now. And it's 58-39 for Haley in Fairfax, and 52-46 for Trump in Loudoun. What's this one? Albemarle County. I actually know Albemarle County. I don't know what is in Albemarle County. Do you?
Well, no, I don't. But it's only 9% of the vote here. That's in.
Right.
Matt, if I go to Loudoun County in my Dodge Ram truck and drive around for 2 hours, what are the homes? What are the homes, houses, and landscapes like?
It's gorgeous. So basically, Loudoun County is interesting. Like a lot of places, it's bisected by a road. So there's Route 15 there. To the west of Route 15 is where you get what one person I talked to yesterday called the horsey people. So it's more rural, but it's big, gorgeous ranches with horses. It used to be kind of more working class conservative. That's where you would get your pickup trucks and all that. Now it has become a little bit like an Eastern Seaboard version of Jackson Hole. A lot of upscale, wealthy voters who live on horse farms, right? The other side of the county.
So Democrats now have horse farms. We've come a long way, baby.
Exactly. Well, but it is interesting, right? I mean, there are all kinds of shifts here. So, because on the other side, Loudoun County is one of the places in America where there is the most evidence of this explosion of South Asian immigrants. I think it's something like a 750% increase in the size of the South Asian, / Indian American population. It's a lot of tech people, engineers who come over to work, in the defense and intelligence sectors, among other things. They do a lot. There's a lot of contracting, federal contracting money on that side of the corridor. I had one person describe it to me as like this is the deep state county, which is another reason why the results were kind of surprising last time. But the twist here with those South Asian voters, and they have been for a long time, some of the most faithful Democratic voters, like the numbers are always like 68, 70% Democratic traditionally. They were mad in 2021 because of a change in the gifted admissions program that reduced their numbers to this more equity-based system. And a major court case about a gifted program in neighboring Fairfax County, which for weird reasons also affects Loudoun, was just rejected by the Supreme Court. They didn't take it up. So there's some anger kind of at the system generally there now, but there's been slippage among those voters for Democrats in that area. So that's what's interesting, right? You had the traditional Republicans on one side who were turning Democrat, and now you had the traditional Democrats who were turning Republican. But you know, as you can see, that there's your only suspense in this whole night. Maybe is that, you know, that little corner there.
Right. So Nikki, maybe pulling the horse farm owners. Are they allowed to cross over in Virginia? Is it an open primary?
I think it is. Yeah. Yeah. I think they can. And that's why you might see, you might see some votes, for Haley on the Republican side. I'm sorry, that, will be a little surprising, but,
well, I mean, what we have there, just in this little mini tour of the rich suburban counties of DC and their breakdown politically, is a pretty instructive microcosm of the class conflict in American politics this year. Donald Trump is not favored by the horse farming class, and does well outside of there, but you know, among those who are attached to the spigots and the wealth of the establishment, he doesn't have an advantage.
Right, but I do think that we're going to see some weird results with Trump in terms of like traditional ethnic demographics. You know, maybe, but we won't see. That's what's so frustrating about this Super Tuesdays. We're just not going to see a whole lot of that because there's not much data that we can really even get from this event. Why don't we check out CNN, see what they have to say? They are saying token expired. What does that mean? Okay. Let's.
CNN won't let us eavesdrop.
Yeah.
Okay.
They will though in a second. Hang on a second. Oh, I just got to sign in. But you know, it also has a better sort of national map. In the meantime, let me go back and see what's going on with. Yeah, you see, we got all these other states here. California, obviously, the one actually interesting thing that might happen tonight, you know, has to do with the senatorial race in California, where Adam Schiff is on the ballot. But that's probably not going to come in until much later, so we won't see that. But all right, let's go back to MSNBC because CNN's giving me a hard time. And see, we got Steve Kornack.
Number one, the big picture overall is the scale of this Trump win. And I think what's notable about this, just relative to some of the other primaries we've had in South Carolina and in New Hampshire in particular, where Haley was able to break 40% of the vote. On paper, Virginia is a lot more demographically favorable to her than South Carolina and New Hampshire were. And yet you see her running under that number that she got in New Hampshire and in South Carolina. And a great example of it is Chesterfield County. The demographics of Chesterfield County, big suburban Richmond County, basically match that of a congressional district that Haley won in South Carolina. She got delegates out of one district in South Carolina, and it looks an awful lot like Chesterfield County. But here tonight, Trump is winning that 2-1. It's possible here.
He's got great rolled up sleeves.
Campaign in New Hampshire, her home state status in South Carolina.
And you can tell he's very fit under that white shirt. There's kind of a humble brag there. Like Steve's ripped.
No, in Virginia, Virginia. We said they give out some delegates by congressional.
Yeah.
And zoom way in here in the immediate.
He's good. I don't know. We talked about this before. I still prefer John King for sheer gesticulation, but he's good at this.
Right.
Look at the writing with the finger. That's awesome. That's very Harry Potter.
This is the fusion of a weatherman and a political reporter at its very best, you know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So apparently Nikki, even with the Neiman Marcus voters, isn't doing so well.
Yeah,
that's what he's suggesting,
But you see a scattering coming in here, and I think the bottom line, rather than go through all these individual towns, is when you look at these towns collectively and you look at the benchmarks we set for candidate performance for Haley and for Trump, for that matter, this is tracking right now with a very close race in Vermont. So again, it's 17 delegates. That's a drop in the ocean compared to what's at stake tonight. But if Haley is looking for any kind of a psychological victory to tout coming out of tonight, Vermont right now,
Vermont,
source of hope for her.
A psychological victory.
Thank you very much. We want to bring in former Obama campaign manager David Plouffe. Good evening, David.
David Plouffe.
What do you see tonight in the results, both that Steve was just discussing?
I love the half beard.
And what it says for what is crystallizing as a general election matchup.
Well, I think the big thing to look at is just as Donald Trump continue to lose a third, in some cases like Vermont, it'll be probably close to 50% of the vote. And these are not general election Republican voters. These are Republican primary voters. So it just, I think, speaks to the fact that, listen, in November, Donald Trump's going to win.
Wow, they can just spin anything, can't they?
But, you know, Joe Biden, if he can figure out a way to get 6, 8, 10% in some of these battleground states, that can be what gets him over that margin to win those electoral college votes. So to me, the story we've seen really starting in Iowa continues tonight, which is Donald Trump's going to be on the precipice of a delegate number tonight. He's going to be the Republican nominee, but it shows the weakness underneath.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, wait a minute.
Let's forensically examine the logic there. What was it again?
Basically that he's losing a significant percentage of voters, and to Nikki, and therefore that shows weakness, and we can infer that that means bad things for him for the general election in November, which seems kind of ridiculous to me.
So they've been banging this pot every night that we've examined the primaries. Okay, there's been bad news for Trump somehow extracted from his staggering wins.
Right.
They haven't been staggering enough somehow. And they project forward that those voters who aren't voting for him now won't vote for him then somehow. Unlike any other primary in history, where usually the voters who vote for the candidate who doesn't win go to the candidate who wins. But
right.
I guess not with Donald Trump. They're just going to go on strike or sit it out or vote for Biden.
And despite the fact that Haley herself has, recently come out and saying that she's not anti-Trump and et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's compare this to 2016, the last time there was a contested vote in the Republican primary, like a real one. Trump was struggling to get to 30 in a lot of those races, even the ones he won. And, he still won the general election for a variety of reasons that that are not going to be present this time. But still, what's frustrating about this for me is that we just don't get a whole lot. I mean, with Kornacki, at least, you do get some information about, like, historically this county goes this way and this county goes that way. But as soon as they veer into commentary about anything, it becomes totally predictable, like, politicized, scripted stuff. How frustrating is that?
Well, I mean, if they really believe that every vote for Haley in the primary is subtracted from Trump in the general, I'd be surprised. It is a talking point par excellence. I can't imagine that tonight, after yesterday's Supreme Court decision, the Democrat commentators are going to be at their best. I think they're still reeling. So some of them I've noticed have moved to imagining a Trump presidency and describing its horrors instead of trying to convince us that, nah, this guy doesn't have a chance. But I guess if you try that still tonight.
I mean, what do you think about the reaction of, because I didn't catch all of it, but some of it was so crazy. I mean, we might as well just listen to Rachel. Hang on a second. The reaction.
You went off for a minute there.
Oh, I did.
Yeah. The craziest response I heard was someone on the Democrat side saying the Supreme Court had ruled unanimously that Congress can take Donald Trump out of the race.
That's what they said?
Yeah, well, yeah. Because they ruled that the states can't, that it's Congress's prerogative. This person spun it as the Supreme Court rules unanimously that Congress can remove Trump from the ballot.
I mean, that's absurd.
But it was one of the maestro spin
pivots, right?
Pivots I've ever heard.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, Jamie Raskin went right there too. He's obviously working on legislation to supplant this decision, but there's no way they're going to actually get that. I didn't actually hear this, so I want to play this now. Hang on. This is Rachel.
I'll leave you with this. There's no magic spell. There's no solution that is going to come, say, from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did the favor of reminding us all of that today when they ruled that Trump will stay on the ballot all over the country. They gave us that reminder today after last week. They made sure we knew it in the first place when they somewhat inexplicably took action to delay all the Trump criminal trials except the one they couldn't stop until after the election. There's no magic wand coming to stop this thing. There's no, magic beans that you can grow here that make some beanstalk take us away from all of this. There's only one way out of this. Pick one. The Democratic Party has picked its nominee. Yes, it's an old guy who is doing practical,
we're supposed to infer that
things as president and who has a lot to show for it.
She's reminding us that voting is how we actually choose presidents.
Since he has been at the helm. The Republican Party is pretty obviously picking their guy as well, also an old guy who, for example,
talk about stating the obvious,
and who has no idea who is the current president of the United States. Currently riding high on his party's abortion bans and measles-curious virological denialist free associating, he's trying to warm the American people up to the idea of just a little bit of dictatorship from him. And he's getting us ready to, start building camps to hold millions. Because his advisors say the deportations start at noon on day one.
Okay.
The courts are not going to help.
Well, so she reminded us in this controversial fashion that in America we choose our president by picking someone on the ballot, which I guess is now a kind of exotic thought for Rachel. I love the thought that she's telling us there's no magic solution when the entire career of Rachel Maddow over the last few years has been to hold out magical moments for Democrats when finally the Mueller report will come in and Donald Trump will be swept away.
It's the beginning of the end.
She is actually the single greatest beneficiary of the idea that there is going to be a magic solution to Donald Trump. And we're going to open the tax returns. Remember that?
Oh my God, right.
And it's all going to go away. She has opened more Al Capone vaults, which are going to, release a plague on Donald Trump than anyone else. But now she's become this brass tacks realist who's telling us you only have one choice. an old guy. Yeah, he's old. You know, showed
But
him walking
decent.
down. She showed him walking downstairs rather than upstairs to a plane. Yeah, downstairs from planes hasn't been a problem so far. And then dude, there was a mouthful in that I can't think anyone will ever be able to repeat or equal. Measles, curious, something denialism.
Oh yeah, the measles, curious denialism. We'll have to go back and check that one out. I mean, this is weird to say, since the two of them, especially since Rachel has such strong feelings, I think, about Tucker, but she's trying to do Tucker, I think, with these kinds of monologues. Look, to be fair, she does have that's her shtick on air, and she is good at it. But there's an absence of, you have to stay in this like sense of humor zone in order to pull that off, and she doesn't. I mean, she's completely serious, and it's a
here for me is the mystery of the Rachel Maddow persona. She's always very annoyed and very sarcastic. But with whom? She speaks to people who completely agree with her, who are practically applauding before she opens her mouth. So what she seems to be doing is modeling an attitude, a certain kind of pissed offness that they might also share. Because, there's no one. It's like she's just come from a room full of idiotic Republicans, and she's just heard ridiculous authoritarian things, and she's sharing that with her audience, and she hopes they'll go share it at their parties and dinner tables too. But like I say, she's trying to be a kind of role model of exasperation.
And to whom is that sarcasm and kind of persnickety defiance directed? Not toward authority of any kind. I mean, I guess it's the Republican Party, and in this case, the Supreme Court. But for the most part, she's speaking. She's the mouthpiece of awesome power, basically. Right. And so that weird sarcastic vibe that you get, it's very strange, because we used to see that, and it was Sam Donaldson or Jessica Savage or whoever it was. It was just straight-faced, direct, distant third person, authoritative TV character. That was the voice of authority. Now the voice of authority is this, and I guess, as you say, they're modeling an attitude, but toward whom? Toward
their lessers, toward the idiots.
I mean, right?
Yeah, toward the lessers, toward the people who just went home after fixing their air conditioner, toward the people who they deign not hang out with. They act so insulated that it's amazing. It's as though she's reporting on a circle that never overlaps with hers, and not with her audiences either. It is a weird sidelight to the fact that we now have firmly equated the Democratic Party with the prosperous establishment.
Not even just the prosperous establishment, though, but like a sliver of, a rarefied sliver within the prosperous establishment. I mean,
she's talking about the uneducated. She's talking about the boobs. It's a little Mencken-esque, and H.L. Mencken. It's the bourgeoisie. But he was funny. right. Yeah. He was funny, and he also had a working class persona himself. With the cigar, he's the newspaper man, goes out for a beer at lunch from the Baltimore Sun. Rachel doesn't pretend to be, one of the people. It used to be that these Democratic figures would pose as salt of the earth, and actually maybe be Mike Royko or
Right.
Jimmy
even Mike
Breslin,
Barnacle once upon a time.
Mike Barnacle, whatever, and they would kind of they would come on as the people who'd had their consciousness raised, as the cab driver who got an education and had his consciousness raised. Now it's just this contemptuous, she went to Oxford, she's a lawyer, she's all these other things, she's got a resume to beat the band, and she's just dripping with sarcasm about the people who are measles curious and authoritarian adjacent and so on. And you're never going to meet them, but she's reporting as though she has some, I don't know, observatory, which she goes to after the show and watches what people at Walmart or something. I don't know. She never pretends to be friends with any of them or for this to be
to interact.
To interact, but somehow she knows all about them.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a really weird pose because, the old school Democratic sort of voice. You're right. It always had, well, not always, right? I mean, I've actually seen these people hanging out when I was a kid. I used to go to a bar called the Lion's Head in New York. That was where my father would hang out, and that was where you would find all those New York columnists, the Marsha Kramers, the Jimmy Breslins, Tom Wolfe would be in there. But
Murray Kempton.
Yeah, exactly, right? And they would, they'd be drinking Boilermakers for real, like, look one after the other. But mostly, the affectation of that kind of writer back in the day, you're right, was this, salt of the earth. I can hang out with the person who works in a cherry picker and fixes the telephone wire, and those people are gone. They're not on TV in any form, not even in fake form anymore. I don't think.
Yeah, who was the last one? Like Ed Schultz or something like that.
Yeah, maybe Ed. Right. I mean, Thomas Frank wrote about those people.
Right.
He wasn't. He is from Kansas, but as he freely admits that he doesn't have like a working class background. But they don't even have that person anymore. So it is weird, this pose.
But she's talking directly to the Loudoun County horse farmers, and I think what she's basically there to do is to assure you that you needn't be around these untoward, unappetizing people, that they can be ignored completely. They're freaks. They are measles curious freaks who are beneath contempt. Their very existence is kind of an offense to good taste. And she's got a sour flavor in her mouth from even having to mention them, but she must, because unfortunately they continue to live.
Right. And because of developments, there will be no magic beans that will allow us to ignore them. So now we must vote.
We have to come down out of our third floor home offices and go down to the courthouse or wherever you do that voting thing and stand in line with other people who are
with the others,
and do this voting thing.
Right,
old person, but we
have to share.
Left us no choice.
I mean that is the attitude. It's so creepy.
Yeah.
Right.
We would have liked to have done this. Would like to have done this by fiat or some judicial or executive process, but I'm afraid you're going to have to walk out into the rain with people who just shopped at Walmart and take a little pencil and make an X in a box.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we unfortunately will have to give you the bad news that you will have to participate in democracy this year.
Right.
and with all that entails, going outside, yeah, what a drag. Okay, we have some more results here, Walter.
Okay.
Virginia is called, North Carolina is called, Tennessee is called.
Okay, let's look here. I don't quite understand this. Trump up 34 in Virginia, 51 in North Carolina. As you go further south, the Trump lead extends, and in Tennessee, it's a 66-point lead.
Yeah, and these check marks mean that they called the race.
Then we have the New York Times estimate of what the final margin will be.
Right, right. So, I mean, those are not insignificant results. That's a lot of delegates. North Carolina's got 74 delegates. So, look, not that it matters because he's going to win anyway, but something like 800 or 850 delegates are going to be at stake today, and he's going to win probably 800 of them, I would think, or maybe a little bit more than that, which will bring him more or less to winning the nomination. So
let's take a guess for a second about how Nikki Haley will react tonight. She's so far spun every loss as a win. Will she be able to spin many losses at once as a win?
Yeah, and what will be what will the outcome be? Because from what I understand, there's a bit of a schism within her camp and within the Republican Party generally about whether she's going to stay in or not. I think the people who are traditionally Republicans are inclined for her to drop out, but there's Reid Hoffman money still to be taken, and they want her to stay in. Is my understanding. So, will she stay in after tonight? I mean, it would be bizarre for her to stay in.
Well, so yesterday she lost a competition probably more important to her even than these primaries, which was she lost the hope that Donald Trump would somehow get taken off the ballot in various states. She really is, to me, becoming a vulture-like character whose whole act is to pretend to be positive and pretend to be forward-looking and so on, but really she's sitting there and hoping in a morbid way that that something happens to him. She reminds me of someone, a 50-year-old woman who marries an 85-year-old and pretends to be a loving wife, not very convincingly, but really, is putting arsenic in hubby's pudding.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, vulture, like, absolutely. I mean, it's like the Joe Pesci quote from what was it? Casino, right? You're hanging on my neck like impending doom. Was that Casino or Goodfellas? I can't remember. But yeah, that's the only reason that she could possibly still be hanging around in the race is hoping that something bad happens to Trump.
But here's what I want to know. Let's talk about donor-candidate relations. When you've still got their money, when there's still money in the bank account and it came from them, are you required to follow orders, or can you just say, listen, I've got a bunch of your money in the bank, but I'm quitting?
No, I mean, there's no rule.
Back? Well, I mean, we never track these losing candidates after they lose. We need a good narrative journalist to follow Nikki Haley after this is over and find out what kind of retribution is met upon her by her disappointed donors. Does she have to go to Reid Hoffman's house for dinner for the next year and give, little TED Talks for free or something? I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, clearly, I mean, there's no question that she's in the race because of a constituent of, a relatively small constituent, I would say, of never Trump Republicans who are influential, and then a big pile of money from the Democratic side, which is hoping that she stays in if the magic bean scenario comes true.
But even Ron DeSantis has only suspended his campaign, right? I mean, anybody can come back if Donald Trump suddenly, is non-compos mentis or taken out legally. Why keep up with this act?
Charade? I have no idea. No idea whatsoever. Let's see what C-SPAN is saying. Hang on a second.
Senate races, House races around the country because she performed so much better than Biden and would really get voters who typically maybe aren't super partisan or typically aren't voting Republican to show up and vote for her, and as a result vote for those down ballot votes. So I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch play out somewhere in Washington State, how they will inevitably respond to Trump likely being on the top of the ticket this November, and how that could affect other races there.
Raven, in California, Republican, Raven, a big state that's voting today.
Yes, it is. Thank you. California is one of the most largest states here in the United States. and it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to vote, and especially being out a voter myself. I did a mail ballot myself this year. So with that being said, I'm just saying that I'm definitely pro-Trump as well. And I hope that everything will be fine with Mr. Biden. I don't know what his absence is about, but I definitely wanted to hear from him.
His accident?
So now you're talking about Raven?
Yes.
Well, we talked about that earlier, Natalie Allison, that we won't hear from the president tonight, and the rationale you explained. Can you briefly tell us again?
What happened with Biden?
Yeah, well, this isn't a nail biter night for Biden. He is real competition.
So he announced he's not going to come out, and
are some Democrats in.
They're trying to make it sound like it has to do with not
right.
wanting to, rather than potentially not being able to.
Right. No, they're not keeping him locked in a padlocked in a basement bathroom somewhere. How do you imagine he spends his days exactly? It's got to be different than other presidents, doesn't it?
How do I think we know that he wakes up thinking of the American people. Right? So we've got that first minute covered.
I forgot that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So his eyes click open. He's staring at this White House ceiling. I imagine it's a nice cream-colored paint, and he's thinking of the American people. Then I don't know what happens. Do presidents get up on their own, or does a valet appear in the room and say, "Mr. Biden, we're ready to dress you"? Does he ring a bell, a crystal bell, perhaps?
Your penis is 43% erect, according to our...
So here's a good question for you. I'm not kidding you. Does the president wear like a Fitbit or a monitor? In other words, is there somebody in the White House sitting constantly going, okay, he's entering REM sleep. Look, nice. Blood pressure's down, nice steady heart rate. I would think that of all the people in the United States who should wear a Fitbit, our 80 plus president should. And
right.
And that there should be a whole team monitoring it constantly,
Like an astronaut, basically, right? Like with a big display, heart rates, perspiration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like Michael Jackson, maybe there's an IV that puts him to sleep at night and wakes him up, and they just mix it. Okay, turn up the Adderall. The Ativan's going down. He should be waking anytime soon. Bang.
Well, do we have any doubt at all that something like that is going on? I mean,
my mom was a critical care nurse, and I've been in facilities, and I have some insight into how they manage the elderly who are at the stage that he seems to be. So then I think what happens after he wakes up thinking of the American people and gets his clothes on and so on is they bring in a breakfast tray. I would imagine that the early hours with Joe Biden are all important. They have to cram everything in. You know? Those first 2 hours are probably all they can assume they're going to get with him. Before nap time and so on. So I think all the big decisions probably get made around 9:30.
But then what do they do with him? Do they put like a, you know, an Abu Ghraib style like sack over his head and then put him in a room somewhere? Does he have free will? Like what happens?
Yeah, well, it is demonstrated that he spends a lot of time, you know, at Rehoboth or whatever that town is that has his house in. I think that there's a lot of AV equipment around him. I think there's a lot of medical equipment. I think if we could see outside the frame with Joe Biden, you know, there's somebody with a black bag standing there. It's kind of like when they have a rodeo here in Livingston, Montana, the ambulances are always parked outside. So, you know, there's probably an ambulance parked at all times. I mean, there is for all presidents, but maybe there are two in this case. And then I imagine, you know, it probably take some stimulants at certain points.
Oh, hell yes.
And there's probably somebody around to get feedback on how the stimulants are working. You know, Joe probably self-reports, still not feeling very perky. Okay, you know, and they move in. What I'm always interested in is even in a hospital, when you give a patient, even when a patient's dying and you're giving them morphine, say, you have to get a prescription from the pharmacy. So somewhere on Earth, there exist pharmaceutical records for Joe Biden. Now, of course, they're like all our medical records, incredibly private. But you know, somebody's ordering that stuff, and if it should ever leak, I think it would be the greatest, you know, leak since the Pentagon Papers.
Well, remember Cy Hirsch got the Secret Service agents to talk about, you know, in the Dark Side of Camelot, to tell the whole story of Dr. Feelgood and how Kennedy was getting through the day, you know, because he had tremendous pain issues, also, you know, because of his back. Then there was the Addisons, but he was getting, you know, grade A amphetamines in a syringe in his ass every morning. And then he would pace around the Oval Office saying, like, you know, who are we going to hit? Right. Like, so that was how decisions like the Bay of Pigs got made. And that was a relatively young, fit president. And they managed to keep that a secret for quite a long time. So I would imagine, yeah, you're right. There must be somebody's prescription somewhere.
Well, and we're in the realm of psychopharmacology, which is a specialized discipline. And you know, it's not just some general doctor that's doing this kind of thing. And I don't know that person's been identified. I guess it's kind of a tribute to American discretion that we still don't know who the psychopharmacologist for the president is. We've gotten leaks about every other thing involving our, you know, involving our commanders in chief, but not this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and look, we should be fair about this. I think it's probably likely that, you know, there are other candidates who are heavily medicated.
They said the same thing about Trump. I mean, I remember constantly hearing that he was on Adderall and that he was snorting Adderall. They always add a D-class A element with Trump. You know, Biden probably gets his in a more luxurious fashion, you know, capsule form, time released, or so on, while Trump crushes it up on his desk while eating a Big Mac.
I mean, but that would make me like him a little bit more if he was snorting it. I do remember him being a little sniffly on on Super Tuesday in 2016. Remember when Christie was standing there?
Wow, man, that is, Matt, you just showed a kind of memory that should put you in the Hall of Fame. Last Super Tuesday, Trump was snuffling. Wow.
Well, it stood out because the image was, so Christie was there on display, mute, as the first sort of mainstream politician who had endorsed Trump, and he looked incredibly uncomfortable, and Trump didn't let him get a word in and just was rambling, but kept doing this in the middle of his speech. But it was a good speech, so who knows. But look, this race is going to have a lot of these jokes because it's got two quite elderly candidates in it. But Biden, I think you're right. I think he's entering a stage where it's going to be hard even for the the MSNBCs of the world to talk their way around that issue.
And I noticed yesterday, or maybe it was today, I think it was yesterday, Vivek Ramaswamy highlighted a New York Times front page headline, to the right above the fold, about Biden voters, a majority or something, being concerned about his age, that he's too old to be president. That's a pretty subjective story to make the top headline in the New York Times. And Vivek's implied that they are preparing us for his exit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how would that story even look, though? Because let's just back up. Well, hang on a second. We have a projection here.
Will win the Oklahoma Republican primary. 43 delegates at stake. Donald Trump will win the Oklahoma Republican primary. That is the third one this evening that we have called for former President Trump. Let's take a look at all the states that Donald Trump has won to date. He has won Idaho, Iowa, Michigan, Missouri, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and this evening we projected that he would win the Commonwealth of Virginia. That is quite a romping for a non-incumbent presidential candidate. Let us now look
at
the
a lot of
Democratic
effects.
Primary in Oklahoma, where CNN projects Joe Biden, the incumbent president, will win with 36 delegates at stake. That is Joe Biden's latest victory this evening that we projected, in addition to victories in other Commonwealths and states. Let's go to North Carolina right now, because earlier Boris Sanchez noted a projection for the Republican nominee for the governor. There's a big governor's race, and you have some news on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah, Jake, CNN is now projecting that North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein will be the Democrat in this race come November. Stein made a name for himself as Attorney General by suing the Trump administration multiple times on a variety of issues, including the environment. Stein has a big war chest, as well as the backing of the state's governor, Roy Cooper, who is term limited. This is a preview now as we look at the projection that CNN has made on the Republican side, that Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson will be the Republican candidate in that race.
Wow, that was big news. Broadcast schools served these people well, because all they had to do was pronounce a series of state names and remind us that a couple are commonwealths, and do it with a sense of suspense, even though it was just absolutely rote.
Yeah, that is a projection that we are projecting. I mean, that's what this whole thing has been reduced to. It's, I mean, it's kind of touching. I'm sorry, but they just don't. There isn't a whole lot to say about this. So we've added, and now it looks like we've just added Maine too. So they called Maine for Trump. So this is going to end up being, basically, they may get all the way. I mean, can they get all the way to 12-15? No, they can't get all the way to 12-15.
I heard some analysis that it's not possible.
It's close. It's going to be close, though. I mean, it'll be, it won't be long from here. So the other race that is of interest, obviously, is this one, the California Senate primary, which will end up reducing. They have an odd system there, and anybody in the audience, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't spent a lot of time in this. But basically, it's sort of a ranked choice type of thing, where the top two finishers in a general primary to replace Dianne Feinstein will end up moving forward. Now, the suspense tonight with this is whether or not Adam Schiff will end up running against Steve Garvey in this whole thing. He has made kind of a charge in
Steve Garvey, the
baseball player. Yes. Let me see if I can find a poll on that. Hang on a second. But the prospect of Adam Schiff reaching the Senate is kind of amazing, given what a complete, screw up Schiff has been over the last 8 years. How he's gotten basically everything wrong, but
he got famous doing it, and he got his face on television, and it shows you that there are real incentives to be a grandstander with nothing to show for it except your TV time, your accumulated TV time. I mean, he was the Rachel Maddow of House politicians, always promising revelations that never came, leading the Russiagate thing, king of insinuation, and apparently that's a way to move up if he wins. Right.
Yeah, that would be incredible. Hang on a second, I'm just finding this. So the polls out there are showing Garvey and Schiff in a dead heat. Let's see if I can find.
I want Garvey. I mean, think about the role that professional athletes play in American life, and yet it's not expressed properly in politics, I don't think.
No, there should be more of them. I mean, if other kinds of celebrities can make it to higher office, why not baseball stars?
Have we had any pro athletes in?
Yeah, Jim Bunning. Remember, he was a senator for a long time. Okay. The great pitcher. I'm trying to think of who else. I'm sure I'm missing some, but not
Jack Kemp.
Jack Kemp, right? Jack Kemp, of course. Yeah. So here's the slate of candidates in the open primary: Garvey, Lee, Schiff, Katie Porter. But that's a little bit deceiving, because actually it's almost certainly going to end up being Garvey versus Schiff. They're both at like 25-26% from what I can understand. So that'll be really, I mean, could you imagine if Steve Garvey beat Adam Schiff in a general senatorial election? That would be hilarious. Somebody points out Jesse Ventura. He's a wrestler, obviously.
Right.
Do we call that an athlete? Yeah, I guess we do. Right.
Do you know any pro wrestlers? They're athletes.
Oh no, I know Jesse. I mean, he's amazing. Yeah.
And I know Tyrus from the Greg Gutfeld show, and he comes in so beaten up, it's like he was run over by a freight train. I mean, that's a real sport, that pro wrestling, for sure.
Yeah, and he was a Navy SEAL too. I mean, Jesse is an enormous person. Like I feel like a small human being next to Jesse Ventura, and I don't know. He's just sort of a uniquely large person. There are like some basketball players who might be 6'10", but they don't seem all that big to you. Meanwhile, if you stand next to Wilt Chamberlain, or even other basketball players thought he was huge. That's just kind of the same thing with Jesse, I think. Anyway, what else is there to say about this whole thing? I mean, apart from the Senate race, Haley is a total non-factor. The one place where she might have done well was Virginia. Should we look in and see how she did with some of those other counties? I mean, I am a little curious with that.
I mean, the masochist in me just wants to watch MSNBC as they roll out their heavy hitters. I mean, now we're a little further into the evening. They should be opining about the collapse of democracy by now.
Here we go.
Well, certainly it's interesting to see that Donald Trump continues to march toward the Republican nomination. He is a clear and present danger to our democracy, to our way of life.
Dude, did I call it?
Everyday Americans, and I think,
the clear and present danger
on a night like
no,
this,
I said we should tune into MSNBC and find out about the threat to our democracy.
Oh, right, yes, yeah.
Between the former president and President Joe Biden,
I think we need a counter.
Once it's completely crystallized,
Hang on a second.
The American people will understand.
The democracy on the ballot, that's got to be on the list, right?
Leadership of Joe Biden.
I think there should be a graph in the form of a melting popsicle called our democracy.
Some reporting,
and then it should just melt a little bit more as the orange sun of Donald Trump shines on it.
He told some people that it was the worst Congress he'd ever served in, which is saying something. Man's been in Congress a long time. By any kind of metrics that we have, it's been one of the least productive Congresses, and it's been particularly true in the House. Even Chip Roy, a member of the Republican Party, has gotten up in the well and said, what exactly have we done? Do you think the historically unproductive nature of this Congress has any political effect outside of what it does to governing? Do voters know about it, care about it? Can you see it being part of this campaign as it was in 1948 for Harry Truman?
Absolutely not.
I do think it'll be an important part of this campaign because you can establish a clear contrast. You have a do-nothing Republican Congress that has delivered no meaningful progress for the American people. Instead, it's been chaos and dysfunction and extremism. And
what is it that the American people want done that hasn't been done by the Congress?
A historic Congress.
There's a lot of stuff they want undone.
This Congress starting where we got things done,
I don't know.
Every community, bringing domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America, lowering the high cost of life-saving prescription drugs, including taking the price of insulin to $35 a month for millions of Americans. It's an extraordinary track record of accomplishment. Now, we can contrast that with the do-nothing Republican Congress and also make clear that moving forward, President Biden has a vision for making life even better for the American people over the next 4 years.
I want to ask you a question about your home.
He's indulging his vision for making life better during other parts of the day.
Of who controls the House this fall hinges probably on no state more than it does on New York, where five seats flipped. One just got flipped back with Tom Suozzi. There are a number of high-level targets. There's been rounds of endless litigation about congressional maps. Finally, after a complicated set of plot twists, the Democrats have drawn a new map. Critics of it say it is that basically they flinched, that it's nowhere near as aggressive as it should be, and that it risks essentially preserving a Republican majority. And I'm curious, as a New York Democrat, to get your response to that critique.
Well, I strongly disagree. I think the New York State legislature did a good job in drawing the fairest possible map that is a meaningful improvement on the map that had previously been drawn by an unelected, out-of-town special master that broke up communities of interest and seemed to have been done in a way that provided a partisan political advantage.
Bill Bradley, we forgot Bill Bradley.
Republicans. Now that said, it was under the current map,
premier,
not the new map that
probably
we were running under in November, that Tom Suozzi decisively defeated a Republican and
Reagan played football.
The district
Jerry Ford too
by 15 points from the
Andy was
congressional
in
election
movies about
in 2022. And
right.
Of the 5 competitive districts that we have in New York, the Suozzi district was.
Why are they giving him so much time?
Hakeem Jeffries? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't want to get taken up.
No, I mean, really, why are they allowing him to talk about the redistricting of New York State at length in a way that nobody gives a damn about? He got in his threat to democracy line early on. Chris Hayes, what's he? We already analyzed the Rachel Maddow persona. Chris Hayes, this a guy who went to college.
This is a hard thing for me because I was friendly with Chris for a long time, and
I have the benefit of not knowing any of these people. So.
Yeah, and I just I can completely understand the people who are saying, I can't stand Donald Trump. I could never, I could never think anything else, right? Like there are people like that who are lifelong Democrats who are never going to think any other way. It's the news stuff that I don't get. It's the completely wrong, Steele dossier based stories and never saying you're sorry for any of that stuff.
It's the factual stuff,
right? Yeah,
that they have to pretend about as a result of their opinions. I always find it interesting when we cut to C-SPAN. It's like going back 30 years,
right?
The set, the poker-faced, sort of boring, professionally dressed anchors, the lack of sarcasm, for example, which you see everywhere on the rest of the channels.
They're not.
To Air Force
Hang on a
One.
second. I'll just turn it down a little bit.
Questions he got was about his poll numbers, including a lot of New York Times Siena polls recently that have showed him trailing Donald Trump, several other polls as well, but those New York Times polls getting a lot of attention. Let me just play about 20 seconds or so of Joe Biden answering a question on his polls.
What's your message to Democrats who are concerned about your poll numbers? Last 5 years, you guys getting report. I'm winning. Five in a row. You guys only live in the New York Times. They're a great paper. Can you get the Israelis around?
That was Joe Biden from earlier today. Greta will continue to update you and viewers with poll results.
He won 5
and
polls.
A reminder, of course, you can see all the results for tonight's Tuesday races at C-SPAN.
I don't think he has. Hang on.
I don't know that there's
President Biden
any
saying
evidence that
he's
that's
ahead
true.
in the last 5 polls. We want to get your reaction to that and the Super Tuesday results. We'll also hear from the former president tonight, Donald Trump, at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida.
I think that's wrong. Let me see
what Biden said.
Yeah, let me.
Oh, I think it's crazy wrong. I think it's actually the opposite. It suggests that he's being lied to, in fact.
Yeah. Here we go. Okay, he's won a couple, but by one. Hang on a second. So here's your last, 12 or so. But he certainly hasn't won 5 in a row.
Or 5 in total.
Yeah, or 5 in total at any juncture. I think if you go back, you have to go back quite a ways to find him winning a whole bunch.
There's still not 5 in a row, and there's still not 5 in total.
Yeah, and his numbers have been pretty consistently below Trump for a while in those head-to-head polls. Really, since look, this is an important part of the analysis, actually. If this moment in time, October of last year, which is when young Democrats stopped being a monolithic bloc for Biden. I don't think there's any other way to look at those numbers.
And that coincides with the
Israel,
Gaza-Israel conflict.
Yeah, exactly. And so what are I guess theoretically they could turn that around by changing the policy, but then that would have other effects.
I mean, I hesitate to talk much about a subject that I really yield to others on in terms of expertise, but I imagine that the Gaza operation, the war, will have reached some equilibrium, maybe a terrible one for those who want a ceasefire, by the time we have a presidential election. In other words, I don't think the intensity of the operation is going to continue for 5-7 months. So I don't know how it will affect the general election ultimately. Will it be somewhat in the rearview mirror? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think closer to the general election, are there going to be young people who were formerly Democratic voters who are really going to defect? And well, there might be people who will do what I did last time, sit it out. I could see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that would be catastrophic for Biden. And you're seeing all kinds of demographic slippage, for the Democrats, and I just don't see how they can recover it with this candidate. Although and it might even be helping Trump that he's not on the air all the time on all these channels. I mean, they only show snippets of him.
Mm-hmm.
He had a tendency, whenever he gained momentum in 2016 or 2020, to say something that would get him in trouble and drop his numbers down again. And that phenomenon hasn't happened as much in this cycle yet. So
let's flip over to Fox, because Fox has a dilemma. They really tried to wish away the possibility of a Trump candidacy, I think, for a while. They're not Trump fans institutionally anymore. And yet they're going to not have the ability to ignore him. And they've started to bring him back in to their coverage. So I think they're kind of reconciling themselves to a candidate that their audience will largely support, who they as a network aren't that thrilled with.
Having some trouble calling up Fox. Hang on a second. Super Tuesday coverage. Here we go. Okay, hang on a second.
I think people kind of glob on to something like Garvey's success and try to interpret whether or not there is a sea change or watershed moment about in the state of California. We just have to wait on that until November. Greg Lee, as always, thanks so much. Talk soon, Greg.
Thanks, brother. Take care of yourself.
All right. So we will be focusing a lot of our efforts tonight on California as well. Not only the Senate primary there, but some of these key House races, the seats that right now Adam Schiff, Barbara Lee, and Katie Porter hold right now as well. All right. Well, as you know, we are live, raw, and unfiltered. Let's move from California. We're going back to North Carolina. We have live events happening right now. Let's go out there. I believe this is in Charlotte. You see there, this is the current Democratic governor. That's Roy Cooper speaking to his fellow Democrats in the state after his Attorney General, Josh Stein, just won the Democratic primary there. He will face Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson in the fall. Robinson.
Isn't that the guy who just told us that Biden woke up in the morning
thinking about America?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the key state House races we are watching going into November. Let's listen to Robinson there declare victory to his room full of supporters.
1979 with 5 children in her house. And she had a choice between welfare and work, and she chose work. And she worked her fingers to the bone to take care of her children and set a standard in her life. I would not be standing here right now if it was not for her. In fact, I am standing on her shoulders right this moment. I stand on the shoulders of my mother and all of those who came before me, laid the groundwork that made it possible for me to stand here as the first Black lieutenant governor and possible.
So I zoned out in some way. What's he running for?
Governor, I think.
Those who want to go into the mud, feel free. Where we're going is we're going towards the substantive issues that all North Carolinians face. The things that will make North Carolina great, that will take her to her next level of success. What are those things? Those are those important things. Education and our economy. Those are the things we're going to focus on. When it comes to our economy here in North Carolina,
So he's a Republican lieutenant governor to a Democratic governor.
We
Yeah.
were $3.4 billion in debt to the federal government, and we're furloughing state workers, and teachers didn't get a raise for 6 years.
So
To now, a day where we see through Republican leadership that we now have a $5 billion surplus. We're giving teachers a raise.
So he won 62-20 in his primary, and he got more votes than the Democratic winner Stein, and there were significantly more Republicans voting than Democrats.
By having a great education system, making reformations in our education system, removing agendas from the classroom.
All right. I don't know. Anything interesting there? I mean, look.
Well, they're launching a new Republican star. I think they hope,
Yeah.
Yeah. A big guy.
Yeah.
With a certain oratorical heft to him.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That I was going to make a comparison to that speaking voice, but I think it's kind of obvious. But right now, I don't know. I have this weird feeling about this race that the total lack of suspense around the presidential election is just, there's something so bizarre about it.
So I had a dream or something last night, a kind of twilight thought between waking and sleeping. that though we are all pretending there is an election going on, there isn't. And
that's what it is.
By that I mean this. They're hitting these various notes that we're familiar with from the past to make us feel that an election is happening. We're seeing waving flags on cable TV screens, and we're hearing speeches and everything. But if you get down to reality, there is no election. Any contest on the Democratic side was removed. They made the rules so that there really couldn't be a challenger. On the right, on the Republican side, we pretended that there was a challenge to Trump, but it was never serious. It was never formidable. And it was never possible that it would do anything. It was possible that Donald Trump might lose or go backward because of some of these legal cases, but that's not an election. That's
lawfare.
Yeah, that's the story of lawfare. And in fact, it seems quite possible that we're pretending Biden's going to be the candidate, and we say it over and over as we have tonight. But, again, I saw Ramaswamy, I don't know, in a podcast or some interview yesterday, making a pretty convincing case, and he's a smart guy, whatever else he is, and that they're going to switch him out. And so we may not even know who's running now in the ultimate election. I say it's 50-50 that the Democrats are kind of engaged in a kind of cynical bait and switch in which they're talking about Biden and so on, but behind the scenes, they're prepping an entirely different thing. It's very possible. Time will tell. So there is no election, really. We've all been conned, and it's like when they set up an insurance office or a brokerage in a con man movie, and everybody's pretending to, or the Enron headquarters where they pretended to be, doing all this trading and so.
Oh, you mean like a big store con, basically,
yeah,
right?
It's a big store con. There is an election in this respect, that various governors and senators and so on are running in primaries, but at the presidential level, there is not yet an election. And in fact, at least on the Democrat side, there's a non-trivial chance, way beyond non-trivial chance, that we don't even know who the candidate's going to be.
Or that we don't know what the procedure is going to be for choosing who the next president is.
Right.
You know?
Right.
You know why that's interesting? What you said, Walter, actually, that helped me understand what it's been freaking me out about this whole election season. Normally, no matter what happens with any of the primaries, whether they're suspenseful or not, whether you have an overwhelming favorite who sweeps through the Super Tuesday and does really well, and there isn't any real back and forth. There's always in media this intense examination of what's going on with voter attitudes, because in the past, up until 2016, because we didn't see this really in 2020 as much, there was always this deep concern with who's going to vote how, in what way, in the general. Are we seeing those analyses anywhere?
No,
in media? We're seeing awesome amounts of coverage about the Supreme Court case, about the criminal trials, about all these other things, but we're not seeing anything about, well, why is this demographic according to polls shifting this way? Why is this one going this way? And those used to make up an enormous quantity of the campaign stories, always. And I just don't. I mean, you do see them on their in conservative media because they're interested in that, right? They're interested in the idea that they're gaining Black and Hispanic votes. If they were reporting honestly, they would also talk about the fact that they're losing quite a lot in affluent neighborhoods and have been for 20, 30 years. But they're at least doing their reporting. I don't see any of it in the other side, which tells you what? That they're not really thinking about the vote? I don't know.
If they're not real, well, it could be the news is bad. They're not thinking about the vote. The real thing hasn't started yet. And because it hasn't started yet, why spend all this time slicing and dicing the demographics and the attitude structures when you don't really have the main event up?
Yeah, but I mean, look, maybe it's just a cultural change. Maybe it's a change in how the news is monetized. But until pretty recently, the campaign was the reality show in
right
television, and it started ridiculously early. They overcovered every stupid little milestone in the race, like it was a sports show, down to the Iowa straw poll, which never means anything, right? Like Michelle Bachmann wins it. She's irrelevant 10 minutes later. But they would go into these neighborhoods. They would send armies of reporters out to all these different places. How is the Reagan Democrat voter in suburban Michigan, in suburban Detroit, what are they doing this time around, right? Like there were always
the ultra conspiratorial explanation is that that's not how elections are won and lost anymore.
Well,
that's actually not the material with which you gain the presidency anymore. There's some other way of doing it. Maybe it's get out the vote stuff. Who knows? But it also could be that we're not really having an election, Matt. And so they're not assigning people to cover it in that granular fashion because it doesn't exist in some way. I mean, and maybe it won't exist because as Trump as Trump goes on, he's going to be the nominee. He's going to start throwing these immense rallies, right? He's going to declare himself, on the march, probably in about a week or so. He'll have that formal moment when he has the nomination. And they don't really want to pretend that that's the beginning of the election, because they don't even want to cover him at all, right?
Right.
I mean, they haven't been showing they didn't want to show his victory speeches in Iowa on cable TV and so on. So if they admit there's an election going on, they kind of have to cover it, and it's got Donald Trump in it.
That's true. They'd have to treat him like a real politician, which they haven't really done since the end of the 2016 campaign.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they
have to admit there's a presidential election. The Republican nominee is presumptive nominee is Donald Trump. Therefore, what Donald Trump does is newsworthy. Therefore, what Donald Trump says he's going to do as president is newsworthy. And they can no longer do this thing where we have to protect you from misinformation, so we're going to watch this privately and tell you what he lied about later, but we don't want to expose you to the contagion. See, they've set up this precedent that Donald Trump is a contagion, that a democracy-ending contagion. So if they admit this is a regular election, and then they have to cover it like one, and they can't use this new filter that they've invented.
The needs context thing.
Yeah. I mean, so let's just sort of not have an election until whatever point, after the Democratic convention, maybe.
So to me, that means the most optimistic read for me on this whole thing is that news companies have figured out that the stories that are generating the most income for them are the lawfare stories, and that is why they are covering them more, right?
Okay, and I find this interesting. When a television show, a series is kind of jumping the shark or something, when it starts having spin-offs that are more popular than the main show, and the Fannie Willis spin-off show from the lawfare series is becoming far more gripping than any of the original cases.
That is true. Yep. And it's surviving kind of stubbornly, as opposed to they keep piling on. I mean, Walter, you and I I felt like we did like an emergency broadcast when they did the Mar-a-Lago raid, and they haven't been able to maintain suspense about any of these controversies. Even the ones that I do think are a little bit interesting legally, they can't. They just pound it to death, and it dies as a news story. But the Fannie Willis thing is kind of growing.
I mean, and it's going to have a decisive answer soon. She's either going to get kicked off or not.
Right. Oh, do we actually have candidates talking here?
Have Joe decided he's going to come out tonight? Oh, whoa. Look at Kamala. She's having
as more of an opposition.
Oh no, I see.
Trump than out of any sort of genuine enthusiasm for her. And there's been a growing movement among Democrats here to vote no preference over Joe Biden in sort of a protest of his handling of the ongoing conflict in Gaza.
Describe the voters of Massachusetts. What is this? How would you characterize the state?
Well, this is a wealthy and educated state. It's a very white state. I think for purposes of Super Tuesday, one of the most important things to note is that almost 2/3 of voters here are not affiliated with a party. And so under the open primary rules in Massachusetts, that means that a huge portion of voters here can participate in either primary. So given the sort of relatively more exciting contest on the Republican side, a lot of folks were expecting some people who typically vote for Democrats or many unenrolled and independent voters to cast ballots for Nikki Haley today. That's one of the reasons this is more fertile ground for her than many of the closed primary states also on the ballot today.
So what should people watch when they see these results as they are starting to trickle in?
I think what we're looking at is the margins. The headlines are not going to be a surprise. On the GOP side, the question is just how much support can Nikki Haley accrue here? If she can keep Donald Trump below 50%, she has a chance of earning some of Massachusetts' 40 GOP delegates. But under the rules here, if he exceeds 50%, then it's winner take all for him. And on the left,
I'm sorry, Walter. I don't want this to go on for too much.
Turn away from him.
But you're right. It's like going back in time, watching C-SPAN to when TV news was actually like news. She's giving us good and bad news about both candidates, right?
Right. And she's doing exactly what you said has vanished in the other forums.
Right.
What you just finished saying has vanished.
The granular analysis of how different kinds of voters are going to vote and why and all that stuff.
And I like this anchor because her artificiality, her artificial neutrality, which you can see is something of an effort, is still admirable in some way.
Right. Right. It's not.
I actually couldn't guess whether she was a Republican or a Democrat, this anchor.
But that's how you're supposed to feel about an anchor, isn't it?
Well, it was once. And she's wearing purple. She's decidedly between blue and red, right?
Right. Right.
Primary voting on Super Tuesday, but I'm just so thrilled to see.
Well, let's take a look. Given what we just heard.
Now I'm curious about Massachusetts.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Let's take a look at in Massachusetts, and then there's probably not a whole lot more that we can glean from tonight. But
right. And then tonight's experiment.
Oh, they called it. Yeah. Oh. Hang on a second. So here we go. So Trump wins Massachusetts.
But does he get over 50%, which she says is the...
He's at 60 now, but it's early.
Right.
What are they projecting? Estimated margin.
Has the all-important Republican community of Cambridge come in yet?
Waltham, Lexington. Okay. Lincoln, nothing in there yet. Here's my old hometown of Westport. And then let's see. Weymouth. I also grew up there. Nothing in yet. Doesn't look like there's a lot of votes in anywhere. But
so let's see, 5%. I'm not sure that not being familiar with Massachusetts, those results represent any kind of cross section.
Yeah, we'd have to go back to what their projection for the whole state is.
I love the New York Times with that. I would have thought they would have retired that gas gauge graph, which was so wrong in 2016.
Oh, I know.
Which is the likelihood of something happening. And it changes constantly. It's for the world's most anxious people. It's like if the contract is, if you're willing to be completely misled and not and have the predictions turn out wrong, we'll give you something that will kind of keep you still for a few minutes.
Yep. Yeah, no, that was a ridiculous graph. At least 538.com kind of changed their methodology a little bit after that, but it looks like Texas just came in. I mean, you knew he was going to win there anyway, but 76-19, and that's a huge batch of delegates. That's 161 delegates. So it's officially, more or less a sweep for Trump, although the Times is suggesting that Haley may win Vermont. That seems to be what is in play for tonight.
Right.
And so normally, on a closing note, though, Walter, I mean, what would normally happen on a night like tonight is you would see stories the next day. Okay, the general election has officially begun, right? And
love him or hate him, Donald Trump is now almost unbeatable as the Republican nominee. Let's get ready for the general.
Right. And how will we know, what are the key indicators for next year, for later in the year? What will each candidate be trying to accomplish? Where will they campaign the hardest? Which states will be most important? Right. These are all the things that we would normally see,
right,
in the next 3 or 4 days of coverage. And are we going to see them? That's kind of an interesting question, isn't it?
I don't think they're going to give triumph to Trump. I just don't think they will. Not these mainstream outlets. And I think we're going to go into this weird sort of hibernation period because, Biden, I don't think is going to really run. He's not going to start doing rallies or something in April. So why give Donald Trump press? They're just going to put the whole thing in cold storage, I think, for many months. And as you say, focus on the lawfare and this and that, and, try to dig up scandals and sidelight warfare between, internal warfare in the Republican Party, maybe, or so on. But they're not going to treat it like an election for a long time.
Right. Until they have to, but they won't. They may not have to. We have more requests for T-shirts. Walter, we're going to have to make the T-shirts, I think.
What are the T-shirts supposed to say?
No, I mean like the America This Week T-shirts.
Okay. Right.
Because we have gotten a lot of requests. If anybody has thoughts on what that should look like, we've had some pretty cool covers that Daniel's done. So maybe on that theme, but if anybody has suggestions, please let us know. So thank you, Rabbi. But yeah, I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're going to cover. And thank you, by the way, for the donation. Yeah, you're right. They're going to cover other scandals. They're going to cover the criminal cases insofar as they can. They're going to harangue the Supreme Court.
To normalize, to use that new term, Donald Trump as Republican nominee and possible president is to, in their minds, MSNBC, CNN, etc., it is to normalize the death of democracy. Since they've made these two the equivalent, how can they show long speeches or cover rallies or treat as usual, as comparable to past candidates, a future dictator? They're gonna roll out some weird policy that they're gonna announce with much solemn fanfare as to how this is a different kind of election. It needs to be covered in a different way. If they're going to be responsible, if they're going to be, if they're going to not serve the cause of democracy's destruction, they're going to have to do things in a new fashion. That's what we're going to get. We're going to get these statements of principle about how we must cover this because of the unique threat.
Right. So it'll be stylistically like, remember the whole controversy over, should we use the word lie? Right. That was one of the first self-congratulatory things that happened with the press after Trump got elected. Like, we're not going to use untruth anymore, or we're going to use lie in headlines, and they made a big deal out of it. They did stories about their decisions to do it. But I think you're right. I think that the phrase that you used, a different kind of election, I think we're going to see that exact phrase.
Yeah.
And you're right. There will be a media story, maybe even a cascade of them, explaining why they can't cover it. But I want to pose a question to you, which I think is really an interesting one. Can they afford to do that? Because in reality, if there is going to be a vote,
I can't believe we're saying things like that with a straight face.
I mean, we're in this weird kind of Kerensky, version of, the dream cross twilight between death and birth and dying, or whatever it is. I mean, there's something odd about this situation, and it's not fully democratic, and we're not already all the way over to horribleness. But if we're actually planning on an election, there would be an enormous emphasis on trying to convince voters, right? So it'd either be about generating turnout, or trying to reach previously unreachable voters. There would be stories about why Joe Biden is better for this kind of candidate, for this kind of voter.
Right. I think Matt, for all the boring. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to say, but to forego that is a huge risk. You know what I'm saying? Like to forego those kinds of stories and those kinds of appeals.
You mean it's a huge risk for the Democrats not to make
Yes.
their case in a traditional way?
Yes.
Well, I don't think they're going to, because I don't think they have a traditional case to make, nor do they want to make one. I think they have a singular apocalyptic case. If you elect Donald Trump, America ends. The America that's democratic and diverse and so on ends, and a new dictatorship dawns. And they're going to stick with it. They're going to resurrect and already have started to, the Russia Gate style insinuations. And the threat of Donald Trump will be this story. There's not going to be an election in which it tilts back and forth between platforms and this, and candidates and point counterpoint. And we can't wait for the debates. First of all, if it's Biden Trump, there won't be a debate. I promise you that. Not this year. They'll cover it with whatever fig leaf they have to. But in any case, I really.
God, how amazing will that be if that actually comes to pass? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think we've genuinely hit on something, Matt. I think we're about 2 weeks away from these solemn announcements from the press that this is not a normal election. This is not a normal year. Donald Trump is not a normal candidate. And maybe they're going to do things, and now I'm going to get facetious, like when we show Donald Trump, we're going to present him in a little box at half-life size,
Like Austin Powers. How did I get in this nutshell? Right?
But no, remember how in the old sort of, porn days, they'd put a black bar over, a woman's chest or something. We'll show Donald Trump's silhouette, but we won't show his face, or we will have a bar across his eyes so that you can't make eye contact with the future Führer. But there's what we're going to do. I absolutely am confident is have rolled out for us a series of protocols that are going to be followed in the coverage of this campaign of an insurrectionist who must not be normalized.
Right. So when we should start looking for those stories. I mean, it's a fascinating media story, frankly, right?
And to go further with this prediction, I think you're right. There is a huge risk in it, but it is a tribute to how much in the bubble these people are, and perhaps to attribute to what they are thinking about in terms of how they're actually going to fight this election. And
well, right. That makes me very nervous.
Yeah. It's the dog that didn't bark. You're nervous because you're not seeing the usual run up, the usual signs, which suggest that extraordinary measures are being contemplated.
Right. I mean, if there was any kind of belief that a normal election was about to happen, the tone would have to be different. It would necessarily be totally different. I mean,
it's like when a couple's going to get divorced, when things that they used to fight about tit for tat, suddenly one isn't fighting about them anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like the Louis C.K. joke. So I saw this show on Wednesday. It wasn't Wednesday, right? When that doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
But let's take a brief glance a parting glance at MSNBC. See what they're saying about these results. They already know tonight that it's going to be an overwhelming sweep for Trump. Texas is in the bag, so that means that this huge chunk of delegates, I mean, basically it's a done deal. He's going to win the nomination. So what are they going to say? Are they going to give a hint at what you just said?
I don't think we're lucky enough that the moment we turn over to them, we're going to see a confirmation of what we've been speculating on. But I think you're going to see it really soon in the next few days, and certainly the next couple of weeks, of how do we handle an insurrectionist and future tyrant.
Let's just listen to a few minutes before we sign off and see what happens. But I think we hit on something interesting. I mean, I think this is. Oh. Going off air. Okay. Hey, to commercial. All right. Well, maybe not.
They advertise gambling on TV now, or is that just a local market?
What wouldn't they advertise at this point? I mean, although, to be fair to MSNBC, they are hold on a second. Someone is saying that there's a problem with Rumble. I'm not seeing that on my thing. All right. Well, folks, I'm sorry. We're going to wrap up soon anyway. I apologize. But yeah, so where was I? Okay, I was looking at the results. I don't know. I mean, I think for tonight,
we were going to go to MSNBC.
Yeah, we were going to go to MSNBC, and that's sorry. I was going to make a point that MSNBC, for all the negatives about it, it actually is having a better, is showing year-over-year improvement, or at least was briefly about a month ago, which was kind of a surprising result for me.
What's your metric for improvement?
But like ratings versus this time last year, that kind of thing. They had like an overall slight growth at one point recently, which is unusual because most of the networks have been, cable networks have been down, in significant volume in the last 3 years. CNN and MSNBC have both taken big hits, but MSNBC was trending up recently, which I think needs to be pointed out. But
they've got Steve, and I like Steve.
Yeah, Steve's good. If they had an all Steve cam, that would be interesting. Right. But yeah, no, I think Walter, I think you really hit on something. I think the different kind of election story is the thing we got to start looking for, and maybe that will offer some kind of hint about what exactly we're dealing with, because it's just been so surreal, this whole campaign thing. To not see the attempt even to make money off it. You know what I'm saying? Like they used to just to make cash, create drama out of nothing with the campaign, and now they're not doing that.
Matt, I mean, to get a little big picture, I don't think short-term money matters to these institutions as much as it used to. They're in service to something larger. They've kind of fused with the Borg, and they're not going to. I put short-term profits over service to the blob. I don't think they do that anymore.
Yeah, unbelievable. Well, this is interesting. They're going, if they don't do those stories tomorrow, those we have entered general election territory, and then the sub-dick of all the things that we would get in a normal election year. I think we got to say that something's up. You know.
Well, I think they'll probably tabletop it for a few days, meaning they'll play their game of Risk in the back room, because there have been some new wrinkles in the last couple of days. We know that the state ballot issue is off the table now. We know that Nikki's been soundly defeated, though they could have expected that. I think they'll temporize. There'll be a few days of quiet. We'll turn to some other, juicy diversionary stories, and then at some point they're going to come out with their solemn announcement about a different kind of election, and we're going to cover Donald Trump in a different way because the threat to democracy is that serious. Now, Fox won't do that, won't play. They can't. They truly can't afford to play that game. So maybe they'll be the only channel that shows Donald Trump speeches or something.
Or does any of these? I've actually seen them do negative analyses about Trump in certain states. Anyway,
yeah, they may carry on as semi-normal.
Let's see what we got here just for a minute or two, and then we can let all these folks go. But
in your state, Donald Trump's name never actually left the Colorado ballot, but it was certainly an issue that was litigated fiercely both in the Supreme Court and in the court of public opinion. Do you think it animated Democrats more or Republicans? And what do you think it portends for the coming months?
Well, first, thanks to everybody who voted. So excited about the turnout, Republican, Democratic, Colorado, across the country. So many voters across the country.
Guys actually told poll lists.
It's kind of like reading tea leaves. Everybody sees something different in it. Obviously, it highlights the role that President Trump played on January 6th, which obviously animates voters who care about protecting our democracy and integrity in the institution of the presidency. Obviously, the prospect of removing somebody from a primary ballot animates people, but he always was on the Colorado primary ballot. That was never in jeopardy. They went out. In fact, not only are Nikki Haley and Donald Trump on it, but a number of candidates who've actually dropped out are on it, like Ron DeSantis and a number of others. And then I voted in the Democratic primary in Colorado. There's a bunch of people I never even heard of, in addition to President Biden, who won overwhelmingly here in our state.
I don't like this guy's shtick. Just Mr. Normal.
A line for
no
not
big
committed
deal.
or non-committed. Uncommitted, known colloquially to the rest of us in the rest of the other 49 states. That was not an option until December, I believe, when the Democratic State Party of Colorado decided to add that option for voters in your state. Can you talk a little bit about why Democrats felt that was necessary and what it signals to the incumbent, Joe Biden?
Well, I can't speak to why it was included. I know it has in prior elections, but I can speak to the fact that President Biden won overwhelmingly, a higher percentage of the vote than Donald Trump in the Democratic primary. I think it's good that it shows his strength, and there's people making a big show of voting for nobody, and they're only a few percent of the electorate. It really shows that it's an empty threat, and people value President Biden's leadership, both globally, of course, seeking peace in the Middle East, as well as here at home, fighting to reduce prices and make Colorado and the country more livable for everybody.
Yeah,
that's almost like campaigning.
The decision was that young voters needed to feel included in the process, and that having an uncommitted section would get them to the polls.
I
Do you
think young
that's
voters are
an issue for Democrats in your state, making sure that young people feel energized and animated by the Biden candidacy?
She also has that kind of like sneering thing. I used to like her too.
Obviously, what excited people was Joe Biden. I think that none of the above had to get 15% to get a single delegate. It doesn't look like it was anywhere close to that in the initial figures that I've seen.
Oh my God! They kept everybody off the ballot. They kicked RFK to the curb. They made sure they didn't have a contested thing, and now they're gloating that that Joe Biden is beating none of the above. Look at how well he's doing versus none of the above.
In Colorado, unaffiliated voters can vote in either primary of their choice.
That is one of the more pathetic things I've ever heard a politician say.
I mean, he's whipping none of the above, and
how Nikki Haley given the sort of
they may not even get a delegate. None of the above. What the?
We eliminated all the other candidates, and now the only option is to vote for none of the above, and none of the above just isn't performing the way
either of the candidates, and obviously.
I mean, listen to this back and forth between Alex and Paul is here. First of all, the whole idea that, oh yeah, we should put in uncommitted on there so that people feel like they're participating in a democracy, even though we artificially removed the actual candidates. Like, nobody even mentioning that that's insane.
Everybody has the option of, picking nothing.
Right.
That's how it works in a democracy. We give you the candidate that we chose, and none of the ones that we wanted to get rid of, and then we give you the option of 0 or nothing or none of the above, and you can see it's a choice.
Right, you can make a symbolic vote for
they allowed that.
Right. I mean, even in the Soviet Union, you actually did have to go cast a vote, and they weren't
open-minded.
That was like a little piece of madness we just watched there.
It really was, and she let it all go by, and he presented it as though it was just, he was talking about how cars are made, or some other prosaic thing, not really worth mentioning. And wow, these people really stun me. That it's a new kind of being that we've bred here in the United States. I don't even think Europe or the rest of the world has politicians like this.
It's so shocking. Like 10 years ago, it was only 10 years ago that I felt relatively connected to where the Democratic Party where people in the Democratic Party were. Like, I always knew that the party itself was basically full of it. They would pretend to be anti-war, but they vote for the war. They increase the defense budget. They lie about everything, right? But the ordinary person wouldn't just casually go along with stuff like that, and not think of it as total lunacy. I just don't recognize these people anymore.
So maybe what's going to happen, Matt, is that in the general election, it's going to be Joe Biden, and the Republican will be none of the above, or
it'll be a hologram with a blank face, right?
Yeah. And we'll have a few think pieces on what if none of the above wins. What if a non-entity or an abstraction wins the American presidency? Something that can't actually speak or move or be photographed. But for the first time, a non-entity vacuum has won the American presidency. For the next 4 years, we will have a still shot of the empty Oval Office, and let's hope for the best. See you in 4 years.
So we can't even have like the satire previously was something like Bulworth or whatever, right? Where where somebody just on a lark runs for president, wins. So that actually happened in real life,
right? And
it's been deemed an act of satanic evil. So we can't have that. So the next thing is the next satire would have to be some like blurry creature like out of Star Trek, or like
maybe
the Reverse Flash or something like that. That you can't see because it oscillates too fast or something.
Well, maybe that will be their solution to covering Trump. I didn't know if you remember the movie A Scanner Darkly, the Philip K. Dick novel, where they have the scrambler. So a person can be sitting across from you, but you can't see their face because it's constantly being scrambled by this special suit they wear. So
right, the undercover, the narcs, right?
So maybe in 3 weeks, Rachel Maddow comes out and says MSNBC has been forced to institute a protocol in the coverage of Donald Trump that has never before been necessary. We are going to scramble his image and his voice. It will, and we will also refer to him as Mr. Z. No longer should we, stroke his vanity by calling him by his actual name. Mr. Z appeared today. They'll show a blur, and there'll be some electron.
And they'll have.
Meanwhile, at the White House, Joe Biden at 9 o'clock this morning said, "I just woke up thinking about America, and I want to talk to you."
With the thought bubble, right?
Yeah. So
unbelievable. All right. Well, Walter, thank you so much for and thanks everybody who turned out. We had a pretty big crowd tonight. Really appreciate everybody who comes to hang out with us on these election events.
Especially when we have to make a silk percent of Sauzier like this non-Super Tuesday. I mean, I wish there was more meat on this bone, but we've chewed as hard as we can.
But Walter, it's in a way, it is more interesting, actually. I mean,
it's post normal, that's for sure.
Right? It's. I mean, not to digress too much, but when I first started covering campaigns, I remember sitting down in the plane, almost like in psychic agony, thinking, "How am I going to make this interesting?" Right? Like, because they would the speeches were mechanized, right? They would get up, they would say the same things over and over again, and they surgically removed almost all of the sort of bigger picture interest in the story, but pretended it was this huge dramatic thing. Now it's the opposite. Now there is all this bizarre psychic, quasi-authoritarian dystopian stuff going on that we actually have to try to identify in real time, which is a real challenge. This is not an easy story anymore.
Maybe they'll just use a courtroom sketch, a stationary courtroom sketch of Donald Trump. And instead of using his actual voice, it'll just be closed caption. We'll just see the words he's speaking going across the bottom of the courtroom sketch. While in a bigger window right next to him, some commentator warns us that was a lie. What he just said has no basis in truth.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but it's gonna happen.
Something like that. Yeah.
All right, Walter. Thanks so much for hanging out. And folks, if you're up for it, we'll do these again. And thanks everybody for turning out. And we'll see you on America This Week.
See you then.
All right.
Are you going to go to the